We'll now be moving to our first session, From Traditional to Digital, a full spectrum of PGHD driving clinical trial advancements. First, we'll have Joyce Norte, Senior Director, Clinical Research, Digital Health Initiatives at Evidation, present her talk, Landscapes on Person-Generated Health Data in Everyday Life. Thank you, Joyce.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's session. My name is Joyce Norte, and I am Senior Director of Clinical Research and Digital Health Initiatives at Evidation. Today, I'll be discussing the landscape of PGHD in everyday life. Next slide, please. Please note the standard disclosure slide. Next slide. I'm going to start off my presentation with one of my favorite slides, which is often referred to as an iceberg slide. At the top, we see what we can consider visible or episodic symptoms that are traditionally captured by conventional real-world data, such as claims and electronic health records. Over time, these bars represent less than 1% of what is actually happening within an individual. While episodic events are important, they only allow us to see a snapshot in time and prevent us from being able to see and understand things like the comprehensive view of an individual's health journey, the effects of life events on health, healthcare preferences, and other hidden challenges or barriers, all which may have an effect on overall health outcomes. Simultaneously, at the bottom of the iceberg, we have many bars representing the symptoms that are continuous, passive, and contextual within an individual and what we can deem invisible. These invisible symptoms are said to represent over 99% of what is happening within the individual, and you can only truly be captured directly from a person. PGHD plays an important role in providing a holistic view of an individual's lived experiences, such as disease progression, quality of life, and activities of daily living. Ultimately, things that are occurring outside the clinic walls, which we believe can lead to more effective and inclusive research, treatments, and broader product development. Next slide, please. Another way to look at the importance of PGHD is in this layered format. As you can see, the gray slice represents our traditional data sources that come from clinical measures such as electronic health records and healthcare utilization. When we exclusively use this information, we are only capturing a snapshot or point in time view of a person's journey. However, we can better capture what is happening in a person's life by integrating or layering sources of conventional healthcare data with data collected directly from an individual. This layering not only incorporates the individual's voice, but also builds a more complete view of their health journey, moving us beyond just a snapshot in time. Next slide, please. On this slide, we see examples of the wide array of sources of where we can obtain PGHD. Consumer wearables and mobile devices often leverage sensors and offer extensive capabilities for data collection. For example, some of the more commonly known attributes of sensors can be measures of heart rate, steps, oxygen saturation, etc. But some other examples include sensors on touchscreens of our smartphones, which also give us the ability to collect data to assess things like fine motor skills, as well as muscle activity or skin responses to certain stimuli. GPS is also one on some of these devices that can allow collection of environmental data in specific zip codes. Ultimately, these devices may incorporate several of these elements combined with logic components to evaluate the user's executive function and memory and make them versatile tools for health monitoring and assessment. Next slide, please. By understanding and beginning to utilize the many components of PGHD coming from the various sources that were shown on the previous slide, we can add to already developed data collection models and collect more of this passive data in new ways throughout an individual's everyday life and outside the traditional clinic walls. This could include things like their heart rate while they sleep, how the air quality is affecting their allergies during their workday, collecting survey and geolocation data around when they take medications or even when they exercise, which in turn provides real-world data and the patient perspective, potentially leading to novel clinical opportunities. Next slide, please. This is just one more visual, re-emphasizing the breadth of data that can be collected with multiple sources and layered from multiple sources using PGHD. In this example, you compare or layer PGHD to provide additional insights and tell a more complete story of what is happening between healthcare visits and outside the walls, including clinician reporting. Next slide, please. So I've talked a lot about the importance and key features, but it is also equally important to obtain and optimize PGHD. As we begin to embrace PGHD into research development programs, we must also determine the best ways to mobilize around PGHD. This involves a multifaceted approach that prioritizes participant value, uses evidence-based designs, leverages traditional tools, and continuously seeks new insights. Of these five noted on this slide, I want to emphasize that it is essential to provide value to our research participants by minimizing the burden of data collection and sharing. This means simplifying processes and making it as easy as possible for participants to provide their data. Additionally, we should focus on increasing the value of participation. Participants need to feel that their contribution is meaningful and that they are an important part of the research process. Additionally, the technology we use to gather PGHD related insights should be patient focused, designed with their needs and preferences in mind. Actively monitoring data quality and listening to patient feedback allows us to gain unique insights into what matters most to participants. Providing participants with choices and observing how they engage allows us to better understand their priorities and preferences. This information is invaluable for tailoring our approaches and improving patient satisfaction and outcomes, and will also help us maintain high standards and adapt as needed. Next slide, please. In this slide, I am going to go over an example use case of how the combination of PGHD with machine learning can be used as a patient engagement tool. In the first box, we start with having the participants connect their wearables as a means for us to collect passive data such as sleep, heart rate, steps, etc. Next, this data is transformed into a curated data set that is ingested and processed daily, giving us a continuous stream of valuable information about the individual. Using a machine learning model that is trained to identify patterns that might indicate potential health issues, the model is continuously run, and if an anomaly is detected, a real-time check-in is sent directly to the patient. This can be as simple as a question asking, "Are you experiencing any symptoms?" If the patient responds yes, the system can then proceed to engage the right people at the right time. In this specific scenario, it would be directing them to a clinical trial recruitment page or to provide more information in a symptom survey. This approach can allow for higher engagement with historically underrepresented populations. Some other noted benefits include the ability to streamline trial recruitment and reduce operational costs by identifying eligible patients quickly, also supporting adherence and condition management with timely interventions by providing patients the support they need precisely when they need it. Another benefit of this combined model is improving outcomes by directing high-risk individuals towards care, because early detection and timely care can significantly improve health outcomes. Next slide, please. This brings us to my last slide, and to summarize, incorporating PGHD can significantly shift the ecosystem towards several important goals. First, by utilizing PGHD, we can gain deeper insights into how patients feel and function in their everyday lives. This helps us to better understand their perspectives and needs. Secondly, with a clearer understanding of individual patient experiences, we can tailor product development options. This customization ensures that treatments are more effective and better suited to how patients live their everyday lives. Lastly, incorporating PGHD helps us move the needle in developing medical products that are both safe and effective. This approach ensures that the products provide meaningful benefits to patients. It is important to note that early efforts in incorporating PGHD are truly promising and kind of fantastic. However, to fully realize the value of PGHD, it requires more concerted effort from all stakeholders. Collaboration and commitment are key to ensuring that we harness the full potential of this valuable data. That's my presentation. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Next, we'll invite Pamela Tennerts, Chief Scientific Officer at Medable, to present Jotting It Down, Building Library, the Classic PGHD Chronicles. Please take it away.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this important meeting that's, talking to all the right people in the room. So I'm Pam Tenarts, and I'm the Chief Science Officer at Medable. And I was sort of asked to talk a little bit about the history of what we've done in the past and where we are now, and sort of maybe some of the evidence. So if we go to the next slide, the reason I was asked about this is because we have a platform that uses a lot of these modalities, and my role at Medable is to provide evidence and best practices around these things. And I do that in collaboration. People talk about collaboration. I think there's so much more in the pre-competitive space than most people realize. And I applaud Dime and others for pushing on that and doing a lot of the hard work of bringing people together and coming to resources and data that shows how to move things forward, that has everybody's voice included. If we go to the next slide, what I wanted to talk about is that this is really sort of an evolution, and the new normal for clinical development is where we're going. And this is no different than what other industries have done, right? So in banking, I think I always used to go to a store. When I moved to the US in 1990, they were still using checks. In Belgium, they were no longer using checks, and we had ATMs. So this has been an evolution, but now we talk about banking. We don't talk about whether it's online or at the bank or whatever. Same with phones. We just talk about phones, we don't say landline anymore or mobile phone. And in clinical trials, we've kind of gone in the same direction. So when I was at the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, and we did work on what we at the time called mobile clinical trials, it then changed to digital clinical trials. And then we talked about decentralized clinical trials, and eventually we'll just talk about clinical trials and use the modalities that are most helpful in those trials. And those will for sure include patient-generated health data, because it's a much better way of identifying how a patient feels, functions, and survives, and how we can really assess the effect of a medical product. If we go to the next slide. One of the other things that's been happening is that there's sort of been an evolution in how these modalities have been deployed. So I was at a clinical research site from 1995 to 2007. These were the paper days. Towards the end, it was actually the Palm Pilot days, but those are over as well, I guess. They were over by the time I left my research site. So at the time, it would have been, snapshots of how patient felt with the paper. The data was only available during the visits when the participants brought in their questionnaires. And sometimes, it was clear that they sort of filled them out at different time spots. And then other times, and rarely, I don't want to say this happened a lot, but there were times where I kind of felt maybe somebody had filled them out altogether instead of maybe once a week over the past 4 weeks that we hadn't seen the patients. And then if we think about how you measure physical activity, the 6-minute walk test was easy to measure. We had cones in our research office, and they walked around, and 6 minutes we captured what it was like. That has been changed to sort of these individual builds and integrations. So for ECOAs, we used to make the one ECOA per study. It was sort of bespoke to the study. The benefits clearly are that you have data available in real time while the participant is filling it out. You have a date and time stamped, which is kind of nice because you kind of know when they've completed it. In the case of a physical measure and a sensor or wearable measuring something, you might have continuous and more frequent measures. So it's not the one 6-minute walk test every month for Parkinson's trials, to the point that the previous presenter made, but it's maybe more frequent or continuous measurements of mobility, and the data flows need to be ensured, because the downloads from the servers for a sensor or wearable will be at different times. And in the sensor world, when we first started on talking about digital health data in 2015, a lot of our conversations were about the sensor and would it be on the patient or maybe on the caregiver or maybe on the dog. And maybe luckily we're past those discussions, but a lot of those things also have to be ensured. And now we're really moving in the space of libraries where we build and integrate outside of a study. So we have them on our bench. And for example, we would have libraries where we have general ECOAs, where they're just generally made, they're off the shelf, they can be used in a clinical trial within a few days, or they can be firewalled for sponsors. So you envision, if you like a literal library building, you'd have a room for sponsor A and you have another room for sponsor B, and no other sponsor can go in there because they might have adapted some of their ECOAs for very specific things. And then they also are pre-licensed and translated, so again, they're easy to go. In the sensor world, we're also moving to a space where we have things on our bench so that if you want to, use a pulse oximeter, it's already done. We don't need to make the integrations anymore. And we're moving, I think, as a community, more and more to that kind of a space where things are easier to use. If we move to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about how much are these things being used in clinical trials. And I was on a meeting earlier this week, also by the FDA, about an FNIH, Foundation of the NIH, about digital endpoints. And there, Leonard Sachs talked about this study they did where they did a summary of endpoints in registrational trials that came to the FDA from 2015 to 2020. And if you look at the bottom, there was about 30% of endpoints that were collected via ECOAs, via PROS and ClinROS. And so 30%, while we're talking about how this should be the norm and we should ask people more, it's not completely it's not a complete, endpoints are not just digital endpoints either. If you look at medical devices, then the next slide, they have a similar slide that was on the same time frame. And the colleagues at the FDA there did sort of a study of what, was the pro inclusion, and it doesn't include digital endpoint or generated health data from sensors or wearables, but it kind of gives you a sense that there it's actually used a little bit more. It all ends in 2020, so we'll be really curious to see what the pandemic in 2020 may have already decreased things to a point. But if you look at the humanitarian device exemption studies, which are mostly the rare disease studies, fewer studies, but they are clearly using it more often as in that limited data set in their registrational trials. If we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about emerging data when you use digital endpoints or when you use decentralized elements, as somebody mentioned it earlier. So this is the PAC consortium that was launched by Tufts University with funding from the Regal-Udall Foundation and us. And it facilitated sponsors to contribute data so that we could understand what these decentralized elements really do. Like, and are they sort of like trust but verify? We're in the verify space. Like, are they really having the impact that we all hope it does? And we have a preliminary analysis of the first 60 trials that deployed decentralized elements. And what we could do is we could figure out that people actually were willing to use similar metrics, the same definitions, and that we think eventually this data set will become very helpful in understanding, like, where do sensor data really matter in what disease populations, in what clinical trials, and sort of really get to the granular level of the impact of these things. In the next slide, you'll see some of the conclusions, preliminary conclusions, because again, this is very, very, very early days in this data set, but that trials with DCT solutions had cycle time durations which were shorter than planned. So, there is this maybe starting to see a trend that, yes, we can finish our clinical trials faster, which is then a better for participants because they might have the medical product faster, or we will know faster that it fails, and then, that's a good thing as well. There are some measures that didn't seem to change all that much from benchmark being trials that did not use DCT elements. So the screen failure rate, participant completion, and dropouts seem to be similar in this initial data set. What we did see is that some of the trials with DCT solutions that use technology and other things might have more diverse populations, a lower percentage of whites and higher percent of Asians. I think there will need more data to figure out what the other, race and ethnicity parameters will do. And that we also see some data that individual things may have different effects, which should not be surprising. Like it may be that using ECOAS and sensor data, each may have a different effect in how the trial does and what the measurements do. If we go to the next slide, Smith asked me to also show like what do patients think about this and what do sites think about this, because there is site burden and patient burden. And I was on a call earlier where we talked about how a lot more of the data collection is sort of being pushed down to the participant levels, to the participant and maybe to the site. But in this particular study, we saw that adherence on questionnaires and diaries was pretty good, and the site as well to be able to do assessments and eligibility. So I think I'm going to leave it there, Rachel. I see that you're coming on, probably telling me I need to be faster. So thank you, and this concludes my talk. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pam. Now we'll transition to Rachel Chase, Associate Director in Digital Science Strategy at AbbVie, who will present her talk, Half a Decade of Evolution of Clinical Trials, an Analysis for the Library of Digital Endpoints. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Chassie. I'll do my best to try to keep us on track here. No worries, Pam. This is all great content. So while we're pushing the timelines a little bit back, it's all such great things. So in the spirit of the Olympic trials right now, I'm going to try and shove my presentation into 5 minutes. So the DIME slide advancer, are you ready for a sprint? Let's go. Okay, so for this first slide here, luckily I can skip this because Joyce and Pam did a great job teeing up what the heck we're talking about today. So next slide is a great snapshot of the regulatory landscape. I included this to show how much great work has been occurring throughout our health authority partners to really help us guide the field to use digital endpoints well in our trials, while also providing safeguards for our patients and their data. Now, I know this is an FDA workshop, but I did include some great work from our friends across the pond for a more holistic understanding. Next slide is describing a little bit about what kind of technology are we talking about. I think there are some questions in the chat that were saying, does it include this? Does it include that? Essentially, patient-generated health data can come from all over the ecosystem here. These are just some types of technology being used in this modern era. So if you're wondering, what about data from this, or what about data from this other type of technology? Is that in scope of this workshop? My answer is probably, because this is not exhaustive, only illustrative. Next slide. Yes, okay. Great, that was 1 minute so far. Okay, so this talk is supposed to be a retrospective of the past 5 years of the digital endpoint world. And a 5-year retrospective might seem a little bit of a short time to do a review, but in the tech and innovation space, 5 years can be a really long time. Think about what you were doing in June of 2019. That seems like a lifetime ago, yeah? It kind of does feel like it for us too, in the clinical research world. So whenever DIME was born in 2019, we decided to put together what's known as the DIME's crowdsourced library of digital endpoints. The reason for this was to really show that using technology and using digital endpoints was not a thing of the future. It was happening now, right? So let's use our time and our resources to get it right now from the beginning. And so from this snapshot that you can see from December 31st of 2019, you can see that there's 17 sponsors at that time collecting 39 digital endpoints. But in the next slide here, you can see that this is a snapshot of the same crowdsourced library of digital endpoints, but from this year. And in those 5 years, we went from 17 sponsors to 69 sponsors collecting digital endpoints, and from collecting 39 to a whopping 440 digital endpoints. Now, this is massive growth, and let's take just a short moment to be proud of how far we've come. But this talk is not a victory lap. Next slide. This is hard work. We won't be talking about too much about these case studies here, but the field has been full of fantastic advances and some disappointing outcomes. And And from here, I can guarantee you that the people working on these teams were brilliant, well-meaning people. But tech is not a silver bullet. Tech alone is not going to solve our problems and make everything better. It's hard work. Next slide. One example of this was a really big case from Verily from just a few years ago, where they were trying to digitize basically a gold standard clinical assessment. Yet the FDA said, no thanks. That clinical assessment that is the gold standard probably doesn't show a lot of relevance or meaning to patients' everyday lives. Now, that was a big blow to the industry. Verily was really trying to do us a solid by digitizing a standard, a gold standard, quite frankly. But as regulators didn't quite see that it was most useful for patients, that was something that really kind of struck the industry. How are we looking at things in the past, and how should we be looking at things in the future, especially in this new world of technology that really opens up a lot of possibility? Let's see here. Where am I going now? Yes. Next slide. So I don't think I have to do anything to convince people about how difficult it is to use technology. Oh, that's my time. How hard it is to use technology in clinical trials, because we wouldn't be having this workshop if it was easy, right? But if I only have time to talk about one thing, which I only have time for that, I would talk about this. Next slide. We have got to develop measures that matter to patients. So this publication from Dime and Friends provides a fantastic framework of how to do that, right? Luckily for us, there's no inventing the wheel, right? This framework shows us how to do that. And developing measures that matter to patients is not just lip service. It's not just something that feels good and sounds good on a webinar. Next slide. It's something that a lot of us are doing right now and have done. Right here is an example of a big pre-competitive work hosted by DataCC at Dime. And let's take a moment here and look at the people who are participating. Industry, academia, patient organizations came together to determine how could we advance digital endpoints for this condition. And how did we do it? Next slide. First step, talk with patients. By talking with patients, we learned what's important to them, what their lives are like. Because as product developers and researchers, we might know a lot about a condition, but unless we're a patient with that condition, our understanding is truly limited. And the only way to really understand how best to help patients is to speak with them. And we'll talk more about that at our panel happening right now. So, 1 minute over, but we're just about on time. So thank you for that slide advance. You did a great job here. So let's then go ahead to our panel. Robert, did you want to introduce everybody for us?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the speedy talk, and thank you to our other 2 presenters as well. I will introduce our panelists joining, Pam, Rachel, and Joyce. First, Michael Middleman, Board Secretary at the Light Collective, and Vinay Pai, Digital Health Specialist in the Digital Center of Excellence here at CDRH. Rachel, please take it away. I'm excited to hear the conversation.
Sure, thanks. Me too, Robert. This will be a fun one. There are a lot of questions rolling in on the chat, so please keep them coming and give us your hard ones, and let's make this fun. Okay, so first, thanks everyone for joining. I'm very excited for this conversation, but I want to kick us off by talking about the digital divide. So this is the concept that technology is not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve all of our questions, and technology has the potential to exacerbate inequity, quite frankly, right? From the have and have-nots, and people who are tech literate for, tech novices, for example, those who do and don't have experienced technology or even have high-speed internet at home, etc. So there is the potential of using these technologies in a way where we kind of continue to leave people behind. So my question for everyone on the panel here is, what can we do whenever we develop these kinds of trials and we use technology? How can we be sure that we put equity first, put patients first? Pam, you're shaking your head and you're off mute. So how about you go first?
Thank you. Yeah, so one of the other resources that I want to bring forth is sort of a work that MRCT did with ethics considerations of decentralized trials. And one of the things that came up is, when you are deploying, phones for eCOA selection or other things, to make sure that people can actually work with them in the sense of digital, like do they have Wi-Fi, do they have computers, do they have all those things? And the ethics committee could be a place where they sort of check and make sure that patients will not be excluded because of that, that sponsors will supplement data plans, because a lot of my friends have a $15 data plan, and that might not be sufficient to transfer all the data. When I walk through the library here on a Sunday in Austin, there's people sitting all around it that clearly don't have Wi-Fi at home and need to go grab it from the library, even though it's closed on a Sunday. So I think we have to make sure that we don't leave a new set of people behind. And presumably a lot of the people that we would be leaving behind are the ones that are underrepresented to begin with. And BYOD is the best way to deploy ECOAs in a clinical trial. People are used to their phones, especially if you have a condition like Parkinson's, it might be hard to learn new things, but you have to make sure that the phones work, that the requirements are met. So there's always have to be provisioned devices as well to make sure that if somebody's phone, my dad's flip phone, wouldn't have been able to participate, my dad should have been given a smartphone if that was the case and he participated in the trial. So I think we have to be very careful, because we might be double whamming the people that we've already been, sort of not including to begin with.
That's so right. We cannot leave additional people behind. Great. Okay. Vinay, you're new to this workshop today. How about we give you the mic?
Sure, no worries. I mean, as a background, I'm in the Digital Health Center of Excellence, and some of the aspects of PGHD is something close to my heart, looking at real-world performance of digital health technologies. And I think, going back to Pam's one, I think part of the thing is when you're basically starting to design your clinical trial, you may want to start thinking at the get-go itself, okay, if you want to be inclusive of all populations, what are the minimum standards, expectations? So going back to the point Pam you raised about requirements not being able to be met, how do we able to be flexible in how much you're willing to accept variation in the data that's coming in? Because obviously, if you have low-end devices and high-end devices, your ability to make sure that the data can be corralled as the right way, so that you don't want it to be a situation where you are equitable in getting people access to Wi-Fi, but then the devices data cannot be used by your system, right? Because the data design was not meant for that. So planning for the entire pipeline to be accommodating all these different types of devices also has to be part of that equation, that as you're trying to bridge that digital divide, you not only are including devices that might be low end, but are also able to actually incorporate all that data into your data stream as you build out your analytics.
So good, Vinay. Thank you. Michael, I hate to have a patient go last on this conversation. So would you mind jumping in?
Yeah, sure. That's okay. Can you guys hear me all right?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. I understand. I put a Phillies hat on, so you guys can't hold it against me, right? For going last. No, thank you for that. I'm also the founder of the American Living Organ Donor Fund, an ambassador for PCORI and a number of other patient organizations. So I'm not sure how much people know about my own background, but I am a rare disease patient and started as a pediatric patient. So I have a number of kidney transplants over the years and fall into the multi-chronic condition patient that AHRQ loves to look at. So, I mean, I love the presentations today. I see all the questions. One of the things that I often think about in the digital divide that I didn't really hear talked about is consent, right? I don't think we really understand what patients often don't have best idea of digital consent, right? And what they're actually consenting to. So not only the digital divide looks at things such as, do you have a cell phone, right? Do you have bandwidth to connect to something, cell connectivity, et cetera. But really, do you understand what you're actually participating in, right? As these e-consent forums have kind of been rampant, patients don't really often get the choice to make any changes to a consent document either, right? So you either participate in this trial or you don't participate in the trial, right? And in fact, a friend of mine is in New York today, participating in a trial, right? And one of the biggest things that was really interesting about it, he was recruited in a few days into this clinical trial. He's going to have to use some patient-generated health data for the trial. But in terms of the consent process, he wasn't even sent the clinical trial number until the time he was on the flight to the city to do consent in person, right? So while we were trying to do research to understand what kind of data was going to be used in this trial, what kind of patient-generated health data was going to be used, or tools that he might have to use in between, right, and flying home. We didn't even know what the trial number was, right? So we really have to talk about all of these different components. Patients have to be able to have self-determination of their data, which is a really important point for this. Happy to talk more and have a lot of other things to say. Thanks.
So great, Michael. I think we're going not just from health literacy, but also digital health literacy into this new era. She can never underscore that. Joyce, I know you are passionate about this topic and so many more. Why don't you round us out on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just to sum up what everybody has said, it's really our responsibility to develop an understanding of the cultural competency around the communities and the populations we're working with. And so as technology just becomes more a part of our day-to-day world, everything we are doing, we just really need to, one, give patients a choice, as said, explain, ensure these devices are working, to the ability that we need it to in the clinical trial. But again, I just really feel like using the high-speed internet, example, instead of excluding participants who lack access, we should just, one, ask if they have high-speed internet, also ask if they're willing to use it for the duration of the trial. And if they answer no to either of those questions, we can just, consider providing them a mobile hotspot for the duration of the trial. You really just need to ask patients what they need, what they want, and what they're willing to do, and not put those expectations on them and force them into certain situations whenever possible.
Joyce, that's exactly right. The burden of goodness falls on us, right? We're the ones who are the leaders. We're the ones who are designing all of this, and it's our responsibility to do the right thing. It's not the responsibility of patients to do the right thing for us. So thank you for underscoring that, Joyce. I'm an ops person. I always try to take big ideas and make them work. So this question is about operations here. So we hear plenty about how just everyone these days is tired, maybe overworked, maybe a little overburdened. And that's especially true for our clinical research sites. And that's also true for our patients. Technology is fantastic, and I'm a big fan, clearly. I know that we all are here, but it is one more thing in a clinical study whenever there's already a lot going on. So how can we be sure that using technology does not add additional burden or unnecessary burden? And what can we do to make it easier to use technology for our sites and for our patients? Who wants to take that first?
I'll
Mike?
take that one. Sure. I mean, I almost think you have to take a step back, right? If you want to make it easier for people, right? You also have to really develop these things with patients, right? I heard somebody talk earlier about patient-centered outcomes, right? Patient-centered endpoints. But one of the things that other groups have been looking at, kidney patient friends of mine have been really on the forefront of driving patient-driven or determined outcomes, right? Which is very different, I think, than patient-centered outcomes. But in addition to that, we need to think about data privacy programs, right? I saw a question somebody just put into this. There's a real distrust in the health ecosystem right now. So there was an Edelman trust barometer that was put out, and just in the United States alone, about 63% of Americans thought that technology would worsen healthcare, right? And their trust in the systems went down, right? So before kind of throwing technology in there, I think we need to think about, how do we better bridge trust within the communities, build things in communities, because patients are really taking empowerment into their own hands these days, right? And thinking about that. So somebody put in the question about privacy and security, right? Happens to be like a really important aspect for things that I do in my daily work, right? And I think if you want to get better recruitment into these things and think about technologies here, really explaining to people what are the shared benefits to them, right? So the Light Collective put out it's an AI rights for digital, right? For patients to think it's first ever AI rights initiative built by patients for patients within the community, right? Put it out there, listed a number of items. There was some cross-pollination with the top 10 security risks from OWASP that's on large language models. I think we really need to be thinking about. So data leakage is a big concern. Somebody talked about security and privacy, right? We need to be making sure that we're actually doing right by the technology we're building, right? So if patients can't trust the technology, they think AI, they don't trust chatbots. Over 50, almost 60% of patients don't trust chatbots and these things where they're being prompted. Then we really need to reconsider how we're going to roll these out. It really needs to be a full dialogue, right, as to how technology is going to get into people's hands for a clinical trial. So I think patient-led governance would go a long way into this.
But it does raise a conundrum, going back to your previous point, Mike, and I think Joyce had also raised that you want to have patients involved in, like, for example, building the questionnaire or getting the approvals, and like, so at some level, part of the reason why AI models fail is because they don't have enough data about the patients, right? And part of the reason why they don't have data is because data collected in one trial cannot be used in another trial because the patient has not consented to that use. So it's sort of an egg, chicken and egg situation. If the patients allow the data to be used for other trials, then you might have AIs that are more powerful. But then if the AIs are more powerful, then doesn't necessarily benefit you as an individual patient because it might be biased because other data that has come in. So it's a little bit non-trivial to figure out how do we balance that need for patient privacy, but also need for allowing that information to be used to improve the system that are enabling trust to be built in.
Yeah, and part of that is minimizing data collection too, right? There's data over collection right now. So if we can bring some of that back, develop robust privacy programs and better shared practices, right? There needs to be some kind of independent duty to that patient. And that's really where things I think would go forward into getting tech into this stuff for PGHD to have a widespread usage.
Yeah, going back to your question, Rachel, about, burden both for sites and patients, and Michael really did a good job of sort of elucidating the patient side. I think this goes back to good clinical trial design, and ICHE 8 talks about engaging all the stakeholders, which include patients and include sites. Sites now are using on average 17 different technology systems, because it's not just a patient-generated health data technology they're dealing with. It's IVRS, it's CTMS, it's all the things, patient portal, like the portals, all the things. So I think and you're exactly right. We have historically and continue to make trials more complicated than they should be to answer the scientific question at hand. And the only way you're going to get through that is by involving all the stakeholders, and ICHE 8 highlights some of the ways to do that. And then with City, some of that work had been done to sort of focus on the things that matter and on what keeps a participant safe in a clinical trial. But you said it really well, Michael. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here and also just, highlight that, we talk a lot about patient education, and I believe it's essential and it's what's needed. But to go back to the question about site burden, as an ops person myself, we really do need to also provide the sites that education as well. They need easy to access resources to just ensure the site staff, study staff, and anybody who's collecting this data for these like very important trials understands what they're using. I think, again, putting the responsibility and onus on us as the researchers to develop these technologies that integrate smoothly with existing systems. Obviously, easier said than done. But again, I think it's our responsibilities as the developers, as the researchers, to take on that burden and make it as easy as possible. And then also just relating it back to the digital divide, that does not only apply to people participating in the trials, people working at sites within this, industry. This is continuously changing. And so we just need to gather the critical data, make sure everybody understands, and really provide those resources so that we can move forward and through the technology in clinical trials.
Oh, this is also good. I love hearing all of this. It's from hearing from our response from a panelist today. It seems as though reducing burden is a responsibility that is on the trial design folks. So all of us, most of us on the line, not Michael, but the rest of us, right? We also need to work, as Pamela said, talk with everyone. Let's talk with our sites. Let's talk with our patients. What works for you? What doesn't? Because if we don't ask these questions and we keep shoving the same stuff that doesn't work in front of the faces of folks who don't want to use them, shame on us. That's our fault, right? So let's continue to have these open conversations with everyone. Love to hear all that. Thanks for that. Michael, it's a privilege to be able to always speak with patients. And we are so thankful that you're giving your time today. And unfortunately, not enough groups spend enough time talking with patients. So I want to be sure to give you the spotlight for some time today on our panel. So let me ask you this question directly. What is the top thing that you want all of our audience members and us on the panel to learn from you today?
Yeah, I mean, it's one takeaway, right? And I think we kind of say this over and over again, right? Is you really have to do. It's extremely challenging, but if we're going to do this correctly, we need to build it all the way from the ground up, all the way through to the end with patients, right? It's often comes in later into the process, right? But I think it's more so than that, right? Needing to engage organizations and communities that have patients at heart, all right, and have the right balance of sort of, it's easy to engage patient organizations, right? It's easy to engage different patient communities and community leaders. One of the challenging things to do is to understand the conflicts that might arise within those organizations and within those communities, right? Some of the biggest nonprofits out there have venture funds, they have ownership in technologies, right? They have political action committees, right? So there's a lot of challenges behind the scenes, right? I would say we really need to think, we need to start from the ground up and develop patient-led governance of these trials and the technology that's going to be used, right? There's a real duty to patients here, right? And the time has sort of come and gone, I think, where patients are just going to enroll in a trial for the sake of enrolling in a trial, right? Everybody and their brother has and sister has maybe an Apple Watch or an iPhone, almost, right? These days, so a lot of people that don't still. But really, it's about transparency, right? Shared benefits. I think we need to. There's a right of action, but I think until organizers show, maybe the very top thing for me, right, in addition to all those things I've just mentioned, is security and privacy, right? I don't think this can be understated. This goes all the way through to the processes of not showing biases in your data, right? In your algorithms, right? So even synthetic data has its challenges, right? So for too long, we've seen biases in things, right? I like to use specific examples that are easy to understand, but security and privacy has to be the top, one of the top items for people. It's often an oversight. People say, well, we're doing it, or we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the manpower, people power, we kind of farm it out, right? But if you can't convince a patient that you're going to protect and secure their privacy and their data, we have a much bigger problem on our hands, right?
Yeah, Michael, I agree. If we can't convince patients that we protect them, shame on us. And quite frankly, patients shouldn't be using their time. If we can't make them feel safe, that's on us. That's how I feel. That's a big statement. Hope that's okay to say. So thanks for that, Michael. Fantastic input. And I feel as though there's no one on this panel who would disagree with you. We do, in order to keep us all on track here with time, I like to do this round robin discussion today. So this question is for all of you. So as we close out, I'd love to hear from each one of you. I already asked this to Michael, so I'll give you 2 questions to choose from, everybody. So one, what's your one piece, your top piece of information you want to share with everyone today on the line? Or 2, my talk with a retrospective of the past 5 years of the digital endpoints world. So what do you want to see in the next 5 years? Let's Vinay, how about you? Can we start with you?
Sure, I'll try and answer both questions. One piece of information, I guess it's a 2-parter. We have a challenge ongoing right now where we are trying to look at digitally derived endpoints for Parkinson's disease, and I'm encouraging people to go to the challenge site, and I mean, you can Google for, like, it's called DFOGD, and I think Robert talked about it also. But basically, this is way for like when you're having novel metrics come out of all these new trials and all, how do you make sure that these are accurate and can be validated? And so those are some of the things we're very interested in understanding, especially when these building devices to come out to market through the FDA processes, then you may want to make sure that some of the steps are checked out. So those some of the things I would like to talk about. And I think the other thing I would probably advocate is that when you talk about using AI, one of the things, the value of AI is that potentially a lot of clinical trials still have missing data because patients are not going to carry the variables with them all the time. So how can you use AI smartly to make sure that the missing data is accounted for? And that is done minimizing bias and helping ensure that all the issues that Mike raised are addressed also within that same framing. So those are the two things I would talk about.
I will jump in. I will say I'll answer both quickly. In the next 5 years, I really want to see just all this PGHD, this real world data that we're gathering, AI, machine learning. I'd like us to have a better understanding of it, as you said, Michael, understanding how we are affecting privacy, how we're using it, and just all of it layered together. In my mind, what I'd really love to see is more preventative models. Using all this data, what can we do to prevent illness? How can we stop things, bad things from happening? And then for my one piece of wisdom, I will say is to always, always, always include diversity of thought in everything you do, we do as researchers, as clinicians, developers. I think with prioritizing the patient experience, of course, but diversity of thought from, I think it was mentioned earlier, the engineers, the patients, the clinicians, the researchers, the ops people, etc. Bringing all of that together into one collaborative community, we will only begin to see more unique and better things happen. I think if we keep making the same mistakes, that's on us. And just again, diversity of thought, bringing different people and prioritizing the patient experience is really what's going to get us to the next level and just improve the whole overall development of products and treatments going forward.
So I guess I'll go next. I want to continue on what Joyce was saying, and I think we're learning a lot, and people are learning behind the curtains of their companies. And so what I would hope for in the next 5 years is that we put stuff in the public domain, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We should really be talking about, because if something didn't work, we need to know that so that others don't have to repeat it 5 times each individually to also realize that it didn't work. For your other things in 5 years, I hope that we can converge on a couple of good endpoints. There's a saying in French that's like l'embarras du choix, like there's too much choice. Like we're not going to move forward if everybody has their own particular endpoint for measuring sleep. That's not going to help anyone. We need to converge on a few things, and I applaud the work that Dime is leading in some of those endpoints, but there's like a gazillion things that we need to converge on. So there's a lot of work, and I hope people will continue that. The other thing I want to say, and it goes back to talking to patients and sites, is as clinicians, we've been wrong in this. I see sometimes our engineers, we make a lot of assumptions about things without talking to the people that actually are affected by something. And very few of us are like Steve Jobs, who knows that what we want is a smartphone and it looks like this. Like we didn't know we needed this. Most of us do not know how to do that. And in clinical trials, we should just make sure that we involve all the stakeholders when we design solutions that presumably will work, and then we need to measure whether they actually work or not. So I'll stop there.
Okay, I guess it's my turn, right, to answer the what do I want to see or what do I hope for the next 5 years, right? I mean, a lot obviously of what I've said already, right? I think one topic that we haven't touched upon, which I would love to see happen in the next 5 years, is really transparency and data sharing, right? And what's happening behind the backgrounds, right? So a patient's ability to withdraw from a trial, right, and then have their data removed from that trial and that data set. But this goes back to privacy, goes back to security. But data sharing, right, is a big one. We often don't know what's happening where, and often when a patient is asked, I've asked this many times before, what's going to happen to my data, right? I'm a rare disease patient. It's not that hard to pick me out in a crowd of data, right? I can find myself. I know other people can find me in a crowd of data, right? So if you have a rare enough disease and you're doing a trial, right, it's easy enough to put two together, and make sure and see that you can identify people. So data is not always de-identified. We need to get better at doing, and we need to get better at addressing dark patterns, right? Some of my colleagues, the Light Collective, something we talk about a lot, particularly with digital technology, right, is the ability to think about consumer data and consumer devices and consumer applications, things that may then be used in patient-generated health data, right? Whether or not they've gone through an FDA type process or not, there's data being collected and data streamed and put into these data sets. So I think we really owe patients an explanation as to what's happening to their data, right? And the ability to withdraw it from those clinical trials that they might be in addition to kind of really honing down on all of these types of governance that we talk about. Without that, I don't think, there's not a lot of trust in AI right now. There's not a lot of trust in the building of processes right now and how those data sets are being defined. But what if I want to say to an organization, I want my data pulled out of that AI data set, right? How does that happen? So I would encourage everybody, I think, to just really try to understand what are your patients looking for at the end of the day, but bring them into the equation, right? This can't be run by doctors, it can't be run by nurses, this can't be run by CROs, right? And big tech companies without that, without patients. There's no excuse at this point, I guess, right? It's 2024. Bring patients on from the very beginning, and there are no legal boundaries kind of stopping you from doing so. So I appreciate everybody, and thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.
I think you said it. I
Yeah.
think you said it
Oh,
well.
I want to say one more thing, right? Sorry, one more thing. With social media, right? If we're gonna start thinking about social media and social media listening, right? It's a big danger, and I think we need to really think hard on that if we're gonna bring that into PGHD. Yeah, thanks.
Agreed. Social media is a scary, wild place. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Michael, Pam, Vinay, Joyce. Thank you for your fantastic feedback, and we'll turn it back to our workshop owners. Thanks so much.